From Flurry-filled Blacksburg, we welcome you inside the beautiful Moss Art Center for our first 3304 tip-off show of the spring 2024 semester. I'm your host, Razo Marani, joined alongside my distinguished panelists, Braden Shank and Taylor Brettel. Guys, welcome back to Virginia Tech. How was everybody's Christmas break?
It was great. It's good to be back, but always good to be home with the family. Still caught up with the Hokies all over break. Traveled to North Carolina, got to see NC State game with relatives. You know, always good to get that little competitive advantage over break.
Yeah, no question. And Braden, I know you had a very busy break. Let's hear about it.
Well, Roz, it's great to be here with you. Is this your first time hosting?
This is my first time.
I feel like we're going to remember this day for a while.
I
think we'll go down in history for
Yeah, no,
sure.
I've been back on campus for 20 days or so already. Covered like 20 games over break. Was at Cameron Indoor last night watching Virginia Tech Duke. I'm living the life here in Blacksburg. Couldn't ask for anything better.
Yeah, you are one busy bee. You're making the rest of us look bad, and just a freshman. But speaking of basketball, guys, it's been a very busy few weeks for both the men and the women on the hardwood. I want to start here talking about men's basketball. Obviously, at the start of winter break, they had a few more of those, proverbial tuned-up matchups. They beat Valparaiso, American, Vermont before getting back into ACC play. Dropped the first couple games on the road at Wake Forest, at Florida State. Were able to come back here and get a big win against Clemson last week before dropping the Commonwealth Clash in Charlottesville a few days ago, guys. So what are you liking thus far? It is a bit of a rough start, just 2-4 in ACC play, but what are the positives to the men right now? Braden, I'll start with you.
Well, a big positive is their play inside of Castle Coliseum, right? I mean, they've looked really solid on their home court. The ACC, you have to be able to defend your home court. And if you can take just a handful of road games, you're a contender in this conference. That win against Clemson was probably the best 40-minute effort I've seen out of Virginia Tech this year and maybe even last year if you throw that in. They held a Clemson team pretty much at bay offensively. Ian Shefflin did not play a role. P.J. Hall, Joe Girard, they were non-existent for Clemson. And you do that all with Hunter Couture leaving the game after just 14 minutes. That was Virginia Tech's best win of the season right there. Now, they couldn't follow that up with the game against Miami, a tough home loss. And then those are two road games that were tight that you would like to get a win in maybe one of them, Wake Forest and Florida State, and then, of course, UVA. But the road games you're not necessarily expected to win, but it would be good if you can take a couple of them.
Yeah, I got to talk about, like you said, the road games in this conference play. They are 2-4 in the ACC, but they're playing people close. I mean, you saw Miami, you saw Florida State. A loss is a loss, don't get me wrong, but at least they're being competitive, and Couture going down doesn't help. But something I like is definitely Padula, shooting 47.3% from three, where we're missing Couture the most in the three ball over the past 4 games for the Hokies.
Yeah, no question. Sean Padula stepped up big. And just mentioning Hunter Couture, obviously went out with a head injury against Clemson. He was really weird play, kind of kicked in the face, diving for a loose ball. Really unfortunate to see. He did miss, obviously, that game against Miami, but the Hokies, they did stick in there for a little bit, and then he was able to come back, thankfully, after missing just one game. But where would you guys like to see the Hokies improve moving forward? Obviously, you've got some toughies coming up. You got to go to NC State coming up on Saturday. Georgia Tech's a pretty good team, and then you got Duke coming into Castle Coliseum next week. Where would you like to see the Hokies improve the most? Taylor, I'll start with you.
Yeah, actually, something I noticed, this is in the UVA game, limiting the turnovers, because something I saw the most, it seemed like a lot of the time, very early into the possession, they turned the ball over. And I feel like in that UVA game, they couldn't really catch a break. They'd get within 5 points. It'd feel like they're coming back, and then something would slip up, and then UVA would extend the lead again. I feel like if you want to win in conference play, especially saying 2 other closer losses to Miami and Florida State, you have to limit the turnovers.
You do indeed, and Virginia Tech is a team. They have their big guys down low, Malijal Poteet, Lynn Kidd. They have to be more physical down there. They have to play to their size. It felt like Virginia kind of walked over them earlier this week. They got out-rebounded by the Cavaliers, which is something you don't like to see. NC State is a team, they are 4-0 in conference play when they out-rebound their opposition. 0-1 when they get out-rebounded. So if you can get better play by Malijal and Lynn Kidd, you can start seeing results because Sean Padula has been lights out since that foot injury he had earlier in the season, almost like he found his kryptonite. 109 points in the last 4 games combined. So that right foot seems better than ever, and Sean Padula is putting the points up.
Yeah, Sean Padula has been huge for the Hokies, but there's still certainly some work to do moving forward for Mike Young's squad. And for more on the road ahead, we send it over to our very own Hayden Tolbert. Hayden, what you got?
It's a tale of two worlds as we look deeper into the matchup at PNC Arena this Saturday, where the struggling Virginia Tech Hokies take on the hot Wolfpack of NC State. Virginia Tech is coming off part 1 of the Commonwealth Clash with a disappointing loss to the Wahoos 57-65. ACC Player of the Week Sean Padula led the Hokies with 18 points, hitting 4 shots from behind the arc. Padula, before the matchup in Charlottesville, was averaging 30 points a game when the Hokies faced Clemson and Miami early this week. Hunter Couture and Robbie Barron combined for 22 against UVA. But the rest of the Hokies combined for 17, with Lynn Kidd only scoring 2 points. As the Hokies exceeded their season average in turnovers with 15 against the UVA this past Wednesday, Coach Mike Young was quoted saying after the game, "Turning the ball over makes things hard." Well, that is as transparent as you can get. If Virginia Tech wants to get back into the winning column, they need to minimize turnovers. Now, moving on to NC State. This Wolfpack team is the real deal, winning 4 of their last 5 games, being second in the ACC right behind UNC. That might not be important right now with ACC play just starting to ramp up, but in the ACC where basketball just means more, you are going to need all the wins you can get. NC State won a big one against Wake Forest, 83-76 this past Tuesday in Raleigh. Transfer guard DJ Horn led the pack in scoring with 21 points, and three more players finished in double figures, that being Ben Middlebrook, Jaden Taylor, and DJ Burns. Now, scoring might be more exciting to some fans, but the rebounds are where Mohamed Diarra did the dirty work for the pack by snagging a game-high 13 rebounds. With less than 2 months of basketball left in the regular season, these two teams have two different mindsets. For the Hokies, it's win now, go on a run, and hopefully have their name mentioned in the tourney talks. And for UNC, their mindset is to keep winning and believing they have a legitimate chance to win the ACC. Back to you guys.
Fantastic work as always, Hayden. Now, guys, we're going to flip it over to the women's basketball side, and man, what an action-packed few weeks it's been for the Queens of the Castle on the hardwood. I mean, you cannot talk about what happened while we were gone from school without talking about that NC State thriller inside of Castle Coliseum. Braden, I know you were there. Guys, it was just incredible. Let's talk about it. So Liz Kitley hitting a game winner against the number 3 ranked NC State Wolfpack. That might be one of the biggest wins, if not the biggest win inside Castle Coliseum for this program in history. Just what are your biggest takeaways from that matchup?
Well, the biggest thing I took away is Hokie Nation showing out, the first regular season sellout in Virginia Tech women's basketball history. Jam-packed Castle Coliseum. Oh, by the way, there was no students in attendance because they were all on break.
Yeah.
So the town of Blacksburg Hokie Nation showing up. Castle Coliseum, when you get that type of energy in there, is one of the hardest places to come and play as an opposition. They got off to a little bit of a cold start in that game, but Kenny Brooks told his team, at halftime, play the last 20 minutes, play them strong, and Virginia Tech did just that, played a strong fourth quarter, and a brilliant play call drawn up by Virginia Tech and Kenny Brooks. And if you heard Kenny during the post-game interviews, he had a different play drawn up, and then Wes Moore called a timeout, and then he drew up that magical play. So that's just what makes Kenny Brooks such a great coach, and beautifully executed by Liz Kitley and Kayla King.
Yeah, I mean, Kitley's shot, incredible. The pass from Kayla King, I think, needs to be talked about more. I mean, over the defender, like cross court, perfect catch and shoot. And like you said, first sellout ever in their history. It's like
in the regular season.
In the regular season, yes. It's like a perfect storybook game. It almost seemed too good to be true, but hey, anything can happen in the ACC.
I mean,
to
it's
say the least.
also, you look at Kayla King and Liz Kitley, they've been best friends for their whole life, it feels
Yeah,
like.
pretty much.
I could see them, in North Carolina in the driveway just practicing that shot. King
Waiting
blowing
for
it
that
up,
moment.
Kitley catching it, It's something that looked so natural to both of them, and it was so beautiful to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sellout. If my sources aren't lying to me, I'm pretty sure it's the first time that Castle has been sold out for a women's game since they started charging for tickets. And I think it's a great point that students weren't there, because it kind of just shows how much this town has rallied around the women's basketball program, and it's just really cool. I mean, when Miami came down a few days later, Katie Meyer led off her press conference saying, it's amazing what Virginia Tech has done for women's basketball. But that Miami game, a pretty solid one, but then when you go down to their cross-state rival, Florida State, obviously that was the first loss in ACC play at now number 15 Florida State, an 8-point loss on the road. Braden, I'll start with you. What do you think went wrong for Virginia Tech down in Tallahassee?
See, I'm not sure if you necessarily can say what went wrong for Virginia Tech. I mean, what went right for Florida State is they just couldn't miss. I mean, I think, 9 of their first 11 possessions were baskets for Florida State. They had a girl drop 30 points on Virginia Tech. I mean, I guess you could say they played better defense, but Florida State was taking tough shots and making tough shots. It's one of those days you just look at it and, you didn't get the lucky rolls, you didn't get the lucky bounces, and the other team did. I think that's what happened. Florida State just made their shots, executed, and Virginia Tech, it's hard to come back when the opposition is just simply not missing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, they had 23 points when it hit the first media timeout in the first quarter. Only ended up with 27 on the quarter, but just watching that, like you said, there was a lot of contested shots, and you have to give credit where credit's due. I mean, hey, sometimes the shots just go in, but I will say about the defense, even though it's tough shots, the fourth quarter was truly it. Giving up a 10-0 run in the first 2.5 minutes. you're digging yourself a pretty deep hole in a 65-64 game with 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, that was an absolute blitz. And I think Florida State's a lot better than people are giving them credit for. Obviously, they jumped up from 21 to 15 in the polls, but you can make an argument they're maybe one of the, at least playing like a top 10 team right now. So, yeah, it's a tough loss, but maybe not as bad as what we saw last night inside of Cameron Indoor Stadium. Braden, you were there calling the game. I was there as a fan. Taylor, I know you were covering the game. A 63-47 loss, and this felt like a perfect storm of everything bad that could have possibly happened for Virginia Tech. I feel like there's so many things you could talk about here. Braden, I'll start with you. What do you think was the number one reason that the Hokies lost last night?
Oh, as you mentioned, it's tough to just single out one thing. So many things went wrong for Virginia Tech last night. Starting off, Cameron Indoor Stadium, a cathedral in college basketball. Durham showed up. I mean, there was a good Duke crowd there last night. The Cameron Crazies were in attendance, so it's tough to play there. Georgia Amore going down in the third quarter with an injury, having to adjust there. Samaya Suffer, Carly Wenzel, a redshirt freshman and a freshman respectively. Were they ready yet to be put in that spot? They still have a lot of work left to go. You also look at the fact they got off to a hot start in that game, a 13-1 run in the first couple minutes. Duke didn't make their first field goal until there was 1 minute left in the first quarter. So they started strong, but then the rest of the 30 minutes was not great. They were outscored by Duke 20-4. Heading essentially into halftime and pretty much the third quarter. So they didn't play a true 40-minute effort. Duke, just to be honest, was more physical, more just athletic than Virginia Tech was last night. They would get the offensive rebounds, go for the second, third, fourth chance opportunities. Virginia Tech just looked outmatched last night to Duke.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. It seemed like the first quarter and then the other three were two different teams. I mean, like you said, started off 13-1. Kayla King had like the 1-foot fadeaway three, hustled back, caused the ball to go out of bounds, and they just seemed electric, and then it just got killed. Like, I don't know what went wrong. The turnovers were pretty big, too. Like you said, they just were more athletic than them. It seemed like they wanted that win more, causing Virginia Tech to turn the ball over 20 times. And then, yeah, the injury to Georgia Amore being out for most of the second half of that game does not help at all.
I mean, I would also argue the fact that a lot of games this year for Virginia Tech, they have not started great, and they've more of a second half team. They're more of they finish strong. This was the first time, at least this season, I mean, with the exception of like a Houston Christian or an LIU, against a Power 5 team, this is the first time I've really seen them start strong. But then the same thing with an LSU game. They fell off as the game went on. They have yet to really play a true 40-minute effort, and I think that's really going to kind of haunt them, especially as they get into the gauntlet of their schedule and into the ACC tournament in March.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think a big part of that has been Georgia Amore. You know, she has had a lot of slow starts and a lot of strong finishes this year. And just talking about Georgia, obviously she left the game early in the third quarter. It seemed like she was elbowed in the face. It was a really, really scary sight down there on the floor. She walked off with a trash can. You know, you don't want to speculate what happened, but definitely looked like something head related, like I said, similar to what Hunter Couture had against Clemson. I want to get your guys' perspective. If Georgia Amore has to miss a game or two here, you know, you mentioned Samaya Suffren. She played almost the entire second half last night against Duke. You mentioned Carly Wenzel. They are young, but who do you think steps up if Georgia needs to go down for a couple of games?
Well, I have no PhD, and you know I don't know what the return to play is for Georgia Amore and any of the medical stuff there. But what I do know is that Virginia Tech needs Liz Kitley to step up.
Oh.
She started the game 6 for 7 in Duke, then shot 3 for 12 for the rest of the contest. When you don't have those type of numbers that Liz Kitley has been putting up, the last 4 games entering Duke, she had a 27-point double-double the 4 games prior to Duke. When you lose that type of offensive production, it puts the pressure on the young point guards and Carly Wenzel and Samaya Suffren to really almost feel like they have to contribute something because nobody else is. When you can get that kind of stable ground and stable foundation, it gives them kind of an easy ease into college basketball and into Virginia Tech basketball. So I think if Liz Kitley can keep putting up 30 points, look for Samaya Suffren and Carly Wenzel to put up some numbers here and there, but really just with experience. It comes time, and I think those two really just takes a couple more reps and really get it under their belts.
Yeah, I like your take on Kitley there. It's like I talked about earlier, starting out 13-1, and then it just disappeared. I mean, she was definitely a big part of that. And I feel like the guard play, Amore, the three-point shot, a lot of that hurts to miss. But something that no one really fully pays attention to is the passes. Getting Kitley the ball. Amore is the best on the team. You see some crazy driving the lane somewhere over the head or something. That's going to be hard shoes to fill. I personally think Carly Wenzel is the best all-around guard that can take her spot coming off the bench. But Kitley definitely needs to be found the most. And, it'll be an interesting combination. Clemson, I feel like, could be a get-right game for the Hokies, so it's definitely time to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent point because Braden and I actually talked about this on the car ride back to Blacksburg from Durham, saying when George is in the game, rather, she makes those passes. I mean, her and Liz have been playing together for since the Stone Age, right? So it seems so effortless. So when George is not in the game and it starts to lag a little bit, it really makes itself really apparent. But Taylor, you mentioned Clemson and Georgia Tech coming up on the schedule for Virginia Tech, and then a really, I think, sneaky tough road trip up to Syracuse. How about De'Asia Fair? She's an absolute star in this league. How does Kenny Brooks' squad bounce back from these back-to-back losses? First back-to-back losses for this program in 2 years. Obviously started 4-0 in ACC play, now sitting at 4-2. What does the next few games look like? How do they get back on track?
Well, first of all, you talk about the road trips. I didn't get the 5-star rating from you last night on the trip to
Hey, listen, I don't want to go 12 rounds on this, but
but anyways, I think taking that trip up to Syracuse, that's not an easy place to play. I mean, let's be honest. It's snowing in Blacksburg, but it's a different atmosphere once you get up to the Wireless Dome, the JMA Wireless Dome, and Syracuse. And De'Asia Fair has been practically unstoppable for Syracuse this year. You look at their next road games, though. They play Syracuse, and the next 4 against ranked opponents: Virginia, Notre Dame, another trip in there to North Carolina. So they've got a tough road stretch coming up, and that's why this Duke game is really a game for them to win on the road, and really a team that was beatable, because these next couple trips are a tough one. And Syracuse, again, not an easy place to play, and De'Asia Fair makes the trip even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, you have the 2 games like you mentioned, Clemson and Georgia Tech, and then that very tough road schedule. They just have to find themselves again, in my opinion. I mean, when you look at this Hokies team against Iowa, I mean, that was the best chance that you could see how they could compete deep in March Madness, Final Four championship run. That team needs to definitely show up again. I mean, that was an all well-rounded game. Like Carly Wenzel coming off the bench, all the young stars too. They just need to be well-rounded again. Like we talked about earlier, Amor's starting to have those slow starts, and then she comes back. It really has not felt like that there's been a lot of contributors at once, like we keep talking about the slow starts. So they definitely need to find themselves again, get out to those strong starts so you're not playing the second half basically at a tie game.
It's definitely going to be an interesting time in ACC play for Kenny Brooks' squad, facing some adversity for the first time in a while. But for more on the Queens of the Castle, we send it on to our cool cat, Colby Crawford. What you got, Colby?
The number 14 Hokies have hit a little bit of a rough patch in their last 2 games. After a 15-game winning streak against ACC opponents, they experienced back-to-back losses, first against Florida State and then in Cameron Indoor last night at Duke. These games highlighted some underlying issues that will most definitely get exposed in ACC play. Against number 21 Florida State last Sunday, the Hokies fell 89-81. Now, while the game was competitive with multiple lead changes, it was FSU's fourth-quarter surge, including a 15-0 run, that really made the difference. Virginia Tech struggled to find consistent support for star player Elizabeth Kitley, who, as usual, delivered a stellar performance with a 30-point and 12-rebound double-double. However, the team's overall shooting percentage dropped significantly in the second half, and they couldn't close out down the stretch, which ultimately contributed to the team's loss. Now, the slump continued last night at Duke, where the Hokies lost 63-46. After a strong start, they led in the first quarter 18-7, but then they were outscored the rest of the way 56-28. This is the first game the Hokies were held below 50 since January of 2022, and they struggled particularly in the second half, which is becoming a theme. Key player and star point guard Georgia Amor's head injury in the third quarter was a significant blow, losing their elite scorer and lead distributor. Post-game, Coach Brooks didn't give an update on Amor's status, but this squad definitely cannot afford to go without their star point guard for an extended period of time. While the sky is not falling here in Blacksburg, there's definitely some causes for concern, and here are a couple trends that are starting to show through. First, while Kitley has been exceptional, the team's reliance on her has been evident. Against FSU, this became a vulnerability when other players didn't step up as needed. Next, head coach Kenny Brooks mentioned that the team took too long to adjust to FSU's scheme. Similarly, against Duke, the team struggled to adapt to the physical style of play. And lastly, particularly highlighted in the Duke game, the team's depth was tested, especially after the injury to Amor. This raises concerns about how the team copes when key players are sidelined and who will step up. With these challenges in mind, the Hokies have an opportunity to reflect and make necessary adjustments for their upcoming games against Clemson and Georgia Tech. I'll have the report for 3304 as the Hokies look to get back on track in Castle against the Clemson Tigers this Sunday at noon. Guys.
Absolutely brilliant as always, Colby. Guys, let's zoom out for a second and take a look at college basketball from 10,000 feet up in the air on both the men's and the women's side. It has been a wild few weeks in college basketball. I wanted to get your guys' perspective with all the upsets happening just all over the country. Who do you guys think is the #1 team in the country on both the men's and the women's side? We'll start with the men, and I'll start with you, Braden.
Well, I think the AP poll got it right. UConn is the #1 team in the country right now. Dan Hurley has coached this team really strong. He's got a great group of talent up in Storrs, Connecticut. Donovan Clinigan, the 7'2" Bristol, Connecticut native, making the return this past weekend. They have the size, they have the height, and they have the talent at UConn. I think they can make a run back to the Final Four, potentially defend that title. But you mentioned all the upsets, Purdue and Houston falling. I don't think anybody saw that coming. And by the way, Houston falling to Iowa State, which Virginia Tech beat, so that win looks even better for Mike Young and the Hokies. But I think when talking about who the number one team is in college basketball, it's no doubt in my mind the UConn Huskies are the number one team in the country.
I have to agree with you on the UConn Huskies. I mean, I think they're pretty clear. You could say Purdue, but then that recent loss to Nebraska does not help at all. UConn only lost to Seton Hall. You know, Seton Hall
Kansas.
I mean, they're unranked
Yes.
loss. Seton Hall. Seton Hall's been kind of hot. I feel like not losing at the right time, but, you know, the team he lost to was a team on a roll, and he lose to Kansas super early in the year. They just seem like the best well-rounded team. I was trying to look at the rankings. I mean, UNC's been sneaking up there, but it's way too early to call them number one right now. I mean, they've gone from 17 to 4 in just a little over a month, but UConn's still the clear number one for me.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm going to have another consensus answer here. South Carolina, obviously, probably going to be your guys' number one team in women's basketball. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But if I'm right, who do you think is nipping at their heels? Taylor, I'll start with you on this one.
I actually want to pass this to him. I've heard this guy talk a lot about
Look,
this.
as much as it pains me to say that Gino Auriemma and UConn is not the number one women's basketball team, South Carolina is just too good. The only undefeated team in the country, 16-0 on the season. When you look at number two, I think UConn could slide into the conversation. But Caitlin Clark has been doing some magical things with the Iowa Hawkeyes, 17-1 on the season. And she, I think, could be one of the greatest college basketball players on the women's side to ever play the game. I mean, you look at the all-time scoring leader, she's in the conversation with Brianna Stewart, Kelsey Plum, Sabrina Ionescu. I mean, she's one of the greatest to put on a women's college basketball jersey, and she's just having a great year for Iowa. So I think that's probably your number two. But again, UConn's kind of lurking in the corner. Don't count the Huskies out.
I unfortunately am counting the Huskies out. My number two pick, but I'm agreeing with you in Iowa in number two. South Carolina, clear number one, undefeated. They win their games by large margins, but I mean, Caitlin Clark is basically all you have to say. And that win against Michigan State, if they lost that game to Michigan State, obviously there's a little conception, a little different discussion, but Caitlin Clark did what Caitlin Clark does and drained one of the longest range threes I have seen in a while. So
Yeah, we saw Caitlin Clark's range on full display in Charlotte. I'm not sure if you guys were there, but I mean, Virginia Tech, they've been victims of Caitlin Clark at their own hands, and yeah, what she's doing is amazing. You talk about her being one of the greatest to put on a uniform in women's basketball. I really think it goes beyond the game. It feels like Caitlin Clark is bringing eyes to women's basketball. I think that's really cool. But I don't disagree with you. I think that, you know, UConn, listen, you can never count out Gino, right? They've been there a million times, but South Carolina has just been, they've been so dominant. But there have been upsets all over the place. It's been absolutely wild. Listen, it may not be March, but the madness is certainly upon us already. And for more on the chaos of conference play, we got our own Phoebe Winters with the scoop. What you got, Phoebes?
It has been a chaotic week for college basketball. As we enter week 12 of college basketball play, students are returning to campus and the college basketball landscape looks very different since our last show. Starting off with the men, the biggest headline, UConn rose 3 spots in the AP rankings to take over that coveted number 1 spot. This marks the first time in 15 years that UConn men's basketball has been ranked number 1 in the AP Top 25. They currently have a 15-2 record. In other big news, after a 143 consecutive week stretch of being in the top 25, Gonzaga men's basketball is unranked. Following a 77-76 loss to Santa Clara on January 11th, the Gonzaga Bulldogs dropped from 23rd and are now unranked. This could be the first time that Mark Few's Bulldogs miss out on the NCAA tournament. As we move forward in the season, there is no room for error. But Gonzaga wasn't the only team feeling the heat. 8 of the top 10 teams lost to an unranked opponent this week, causing them to slide down in the rankings. Coming into week 12, your top 10 men's basketball teams are UConn at number 1, followed by Purdue, Kansas, North Carolina, Houston, Tennessee, Duke, Kentucky, number 9 Baylor making an impressive jump from number 14 after 2 Big 12 wins over BYU and Cincinnati, and finally, number 10 Memphis. Now over to our women who had a similar shakeup in rankings. First up, the Golden State rivalry tarnished the Bruins' golden record. That's right, Southern California handed UCLA their first loss of the season with a score of 73-65. As a result, UCLA fell from number 2 to number 5, while USC rose 3 spots to number 6. Next, with only 26 seconds left in the game, Iowa State's Audie Crooks scored the game-winning layup, earning Iowa that number 2 spot and sending the number 4 Baylor Bears down the list to number 12. Saturday was a big night for Kansas State as they extended their winning streak to 11 with a 61-58 win over Texas, and they beat multiple program records. Ayoka Lee earned a team high of 21 points. She became the 4th player in program history to surpass 2,000 points and set the school record with 284 career blocks. As a result, Kansas State jumped 5 spots and now sits proudly at number 7. In other news, LSU's 16-game winning streak was broken by the unranked Auburn Tigers. This marks Auburn's first conference win, and as a result, LSU slipped from number 7 to number 10. Lastly, our Lady Hokies were handed their first ACC loss by the FSU Seminoles, dropping from number 11 to number 14. Coming into Week 12, your top 10 women's basketball teams are South Carolina holding strong, Iowa, Colorado, NC State, UCLA, USC, Kansas State, Stanford, UConn, and lastly, number 10, LSU.
Beautiful stuff as always, Phoebe. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap this up and put the finishing touches on the 2023 football season. Virginia Tech winning the Military Bowl 41-20 over Tulane. I was there. It was rainy. It was wet, but it was a blast. They finished the year 7-6, first bowl win since 2016, first winning season since 2019. Both firsts under Brent Pry. Braden, I'll start with you. What are your biggest takeaways from Virginia Tech's bowl game victory?
Well, they got to put the Military Bowl trophy in a big poncho because it was raining in Annapolis, Maryland for that game. But what I really liked with Virginia Tech is how they finished the season. It felt like they played some of their best games down the stretch. That Virginia game, they were solid. I thought the Military Bowl was a great culmination of everything they did this season. You know, there were some trick plays. The defense played well. The Beamer ball approach was alive and well. Kyron Drone shined. Bayshall Tootin had a nice game. Some long plays. It was essentially an entire capstone of everything that happened throughout the course of the season. And they put a bow on the season, taking down Tulane, bringing home a piece of championship hardware, or bowl hardware, I should say. And again, I think it was just how they finished the season. They saw a lot of struggles in the early goings. 1-4. To start the season. I mean, a lot of people, I'm not sure how high the hopes were when the team was 1-4, and things just weren't going their way, and they really turned it around once they had ACC playing down in the second half of the season.
Yeah, it was just an incredible second half turnaround, and how they won those games. I mean, Pitt, Syracuse, UVA, the offense was alive. Everything was alive. These weren't scraped out wins, just getting to that bowl game, just winning the bowl game. The bowl game they won by 21, and it felt honestly more than 21 points. I mean, Tulane started out with that 7-0 lead very early into the game, but then it felt like they had nothing going for them. And being there was just a great experience, soaking wet, but, you know, it's still fun football, and I think this is the perfect way for the season to end for the Hokies looking into next year.
Yeah, if you guys want a fun fact, you mentioned that Tulane took a 7-0 lead in that game. That was obviously on the Kyron Drones fumble, which was a scoop and score for the Green Wave. Virginia Tech has won its last 4 bowl games in which it fumbles the ball on its first possession. So let that sink in for a second.
I do not know how someone did you find that, or did you find that from someone? Okay,
no,
I do not know how someone finds that
I cannot
stat.
take credit for that one.
Someone
but,
with a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it must have been. But yeah, very, very interesting stat. But to go from 3 wins to 7 wins, obviously a big improvement. But so many members of this football team said, no, there's unfinished business. Let's run it back. Kyron Drones is back. Bayshall Tootin is back. The bad boys, Stephen Gosnell, Jalen Lane, Ollie Jennings, Daquan Felton, they're back. On the defensive side, maybe the best cornerback tandem in the ACC, Mansour Delane and Dorian Strong, they're back. Antoine Powell-Ryland is back. A pretty good, recruiting class, transfer portal class coming in. Guys, everybody and their mothers is coming back to Blacksburg for what looks like it could be a special 2024 campaign. Obviously, we don't even have a schedule yet, but we do have opponents. We have a good idea of what the team might look like next year. What are your way too early predictions for 2024? Taylor, I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, okay, so for the record, I got 8 wins, and something that stands out to me about the schedule is just the similar out-of-conference play Besides us playing Purdue, it's Vanderbilt this year, but then ODU, Marshall, Rutgers. I find that pretty interesting, and they were in the transition into Kyron Drones in those games. Like you mentioned, they started out slow, only 1-4, but they are back. This team that we saw win this bowl game will be facing these opponents, and I believe maybe besides Rutgers that they win out in all their games and out of conference.
Well, that's a big take you got right there.
Yes, it is.
What's not a big take is that next year Brent Pry will continue to do magical things with this Virginia Tech team. He has this team and this program moving in the right direction. It is a huge testament to what he's built in Blacksburg that just in year 2 he can go bowling and has all these commits coming back and playing another year. It's a true test to the program, the coaches, and everything that goes into Hokie Nation. So my hat's off to Brent Pry and what he's been able to do at Virginia Tech. As for an actual number-wise for Virginia Tech next year, I think they see a slight improvement, maybe 6, 7, and 5 next year. They have some tough games. Going to Stanford to play with the new ACC opponents in Stanford, that's not going to be an easy game. At Miami, at Coral Gables, I guess technically at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, still not an easy game. And then, opening night in Vanderbilt. I think a lot of people think Vanderbilt's not great, but you got to keep in mind the fact that it's the first game of the season. You have to go to Nashville, to Vanderbilt. It's opening night, so high hopes will be for kind of both teams. I think that could be a tough game for Virginia Tech. There's a couple other ones in there, Syracuse at the Dome. That's always a tough trip. So I think just some little games here and there. I'd say 7-5. They go bowling again, maybe pick up a bowl win. But again, just playing on the road is not easy in the ACC, especially when you got to go across the country to the West Coast.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you bring up Syracuse. Virginia Tech has not won at Syracuse in this century. So not exactly a shoe-in victory there for Virginia Tech. But hey, nobody thinks 12-team playoff. Hokies got a shot, automatic bid if you win the ACC.
Some ACC teams got to make it, you're right. I mean,
Hey, Brent Pry, he's 0-0 against Fran Brown in Syracuse. It's a new team up in upstate New York.
That is
so
true.
Throw all the records out the window. Let's start fresh right here. Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Fran Brown, Brent Pry starting next year.
Yeah, the
like
past.
the sound of that.
The past is in the
Yes.
past, like Elsa said in Frozen. But guys,
I don't think she said that.
enough about Virginia Tech. Let's finish this up by just again going 10,000 feet in the air, taking a look at the national landscape. What a thrilling college football playoff that was. Michigan and Alabama in the Rose Bowl, Washington and Texas in the Sugar Bowl, and then obviously Michigan defeating Washington in the national championship. Just some quick hitters. What were your guys' takeaways from the 2 semifinals and then the national championship? Braden, I'll start with you.
Well, I think to start, I think the committee made the right call, leaving Florida State out.
Right.
I think a lot of people say that that bowl game against Georgia wasn't necessarily a true test because a lot of players sat out of the game, but I just don't think Florida State was that strong of a team. Once the quarterback goes down, Jordan Travis, Rodemaker is not healthy. They just were not a playoff team. And I think Alabama gave Michigan a run for their money. That was a very good semifinal game in the Rose Bowl. I think I saw it on Twitter somewhere, playing the national championship at the Rose Bowl every year. I wouldn't be against it.
Me
Rose
neither.
Bowl is one of the cathedrals of college football. Great
Iconic.
atmosphere, great time, great iconic venue. That was a great semifinal. The other semifinal was a little bit better. Quinn Ewers, Michael Penix Jr. The offensive field day for both of those teams. If you bet the under on that, you weren't hitting that. Those are two of the best quarterbacks in the country right there. So that was a good semifinal. The championship did not disappoint. I also want to point out throughout the course of the kickoff shows, I went 4 for 22 in weekly picks, but I predicted Michigan beating Washington
Ending out on top.
on
That's all you
October
need.
21st, 2023. Drop the mic. Maybe I'm not bad at making picks.
Maybe you're not bad at making championship picks. We'll put it.
The game pick struck.
We'll put it that way. No, but in all seriousness, I agree. The committee got it right. And like you said, the Florida State game, yes, you can say 20-something guys sat out, but 63-3. If you have all those guys sit out, lose by 10, 20, more of an argument. But in my personal opinion, the Alabama-Michigan game was the best game of the entire college football playoff. So the committee 100% got that right. I think it was a great year for college football, and it's always fun to see some different teams in there.
Yeah, Michigan, Alabama was really a movie. I couldn't agree with you more about the Rose Bowl. I'm a little biased as a kid who grew up in the Big Ten sphere. The Rose Bowl is our cathedral for sure. But you talk about that game, Alabama going out in overtime, and that is how the legendary career of one Nick Saban comes to a close. Guys, I got the notification he retired when I was driving in the car, and I screamed so loud that the person in the passenger seat thought that we were in danger. This is some of the biggest news to ever come out of college football. Guys, Nick Saban gone. What does that mean for the sport, and what's the legacy he's leaving behind? Braden, I'll start with you.
I think there's no doubt, he's the greatest college football coach, maybe of all time. 7 national championships, 11 SEC titles. he is just one of the most brilliant football minds, I would say, in the entire game. Throw the NFL in there. I wouldn't be shocked if he signs one of these monsters TV deals, become an analyst, go on College Game Day, maybe take over Lee Corso's role, maybe foreshadowing something there. But just there's no doubt that his legacy on the field with Alabama and even in the NFL for a little bit, I mean, he is the greatest football coach, maybe period. I mean, maybe Belichick is the only one that really can compare with him, but what he's been able to do for the amount of time he's been able to do it is just unparalleled to anything else.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. I like how you mentioned the NFL and then Alabama, and I do think he will not be out of football when he retires. I do think he will also go on game day. He's still going to be involved. I mean, Nick Saban can't just lose a college football playoff game and then be gone. Like, he is still going to be, there's going to be iconic for the game of college football, and most definitely, obviously, for the whole time I've been alive, best coach I've ever seen, and I think all time is a very good take.
To quote Elsa earlier, Razi, you don't see Nick Saban just letting go, letting go.
I got to give him that one. I'm sorry, Raza.
Hey, it is frozen outside, so you know what. And those are
Exactly.
some beautiful vocals there. Yeah, guys, listen. Whether it's game day, whether it's Aflac, I don't think Nick Saban is leaving our television screens anytime soon. But that is going to do it for us here from the Moss Art Center here in Broomall, Blacksburg, Virginia, for our first 3304 tip-off show of 2024. For our tremendous reporters, Hayden Tolbert, Colby Crawford, and Phoebe Winters, and our incomparable team doing all the hard work behind the scenes, Kyle Marshak, Robert Bateman, Cody Wagner, and Sam Mostow. For Taylor Brettel and Braden Shank, I'm Razo Amirani saying so long, stay warm, and have a blessed weekend.